Hi, everyone. My name is Jasjit Singh. I am a professor of strategy at INSEAD, based in the Singapore campus. I've actually been here for 19 years. This was my first job post-PhD. And what I'm going to be talking about today with you is something I prepared as a part of the Academy of Management 2023, a presentation for the Doctoral Consortium. The title is Building a Research Pipeline and Getting Tenure. Now, any advice that you take from me or from anybody else for that matter should be taken slightly with a grain of salt, that everybody has a different background, everybody's career path is unique, and what might have worked for somebody or what might be somebody's experience might not be directly relevant for you as such, maybe because your background is different, your goals are different, and your institution is different. But just to share a little bit about me, I had a roundabout career. I studied computer science for 6 years. Then I got my MBA, worked in management consulting, got my PhD. I changed topics multiple times. So it took me 6 years to finish my PhD in business economics at Harvard. Then I joined INSEAD, and I've been assistant professor there for 7 years. Associate professor for 7 years with tenure, and then made full in 2018. And so a lot of my experiences obviously are based on INSEAD, and some of these might or might not apply to you. So please bear that in mind. The question to ask is, what is your goal? Are you like me, a person who would really want to get a tenure at the very first institution you join? For me, the circumstances were unique. I wanted to be at INSEAD. I really wanted to be in Singapore, but that might not be the case for you. So if you have a little bit more flexibility, the starting question to ask is, which of the criteria that you're looking at might be unique to your institution versus which are the ones that really do carry over to a broader set of institutions you could target. And, these things could include how many papers are expected? What is the quality of publications that's expected? Does anybody actually measure the actual quality of the paper, or are they just looking for a definition of good journals? Is that definition fixed? Is it dependent on the letter writers? Is it decided by the school itself? Are they actually going to be looking at your pipeline? Because some schools pay attention to that, others might pay less attention to that and only look at your published work. So published work obviously is important, absolutely critical, but you might be in some schools also required to have a strong pipeline. Then an important question is, what cohort, if any, would you be compared with? Are the standards unique to you? Are these absolute standards, or are you going to be compared with, let's say, the people that got PhD in a particular year? And, is there a clock extension? Is there a clock stop? So understanding that is important. Some schools look for evidence of impact already at tenure point. Others say, okay, well, as long as the research is good, the impact will come. And then, of course, beyond research, there might be different expectations on teaching and service, and the extent to which there might be trade-offs across those dimensions. A few other observations to bear in mind, and this, comes. I took the liberty of going on ChatGPT and asking what advice ChatGPT would give. But then I subsetted the pieces that I actually agreed with and that I thought were important and general enough across schools, while there were certain things in ChatGPT's advice which I thought was not as applicable to business schools, or maybe was specific to some business schools or the other. So I left that out. So, the uncontroversial pieces that I completely agree with are, you have to start early. Research takes years. So you can't say, I'll wait till the 4th, 5th year to get to my 5th, 6th paper, because it's very hard to expect that anything you didn't start within the first 3 years after graduation or during your doctoral days can be published by the time you're up for tenure, if it's in the 7th year or so, like it is at INSEAD for you. One of the things that I realized being on the evaluation committee at INSEAD is how strongly the emphasis is on high impact journals, at least at INSEAD, and which might or might not be the case at other schools. So there isn't an exchange rate like, oh, you got one top tier journal, but if you didn't get that, but you got, 3 average journals, then that would be fine. That turned out not to be the case, because there was a big emphasis really on having a substantial amount of work in leading journals at our school, and it might be in others as well, which leads to the question of, it's also important to think how you could collaborate to increase your productivity. And I'll come to this point a little bit more on the next slide. But the important thing is that collaboration can improve both the quality of your work, how much you can, generate in terms of both quantity and quality. And it also helps you stop sooner if you're going down an alley with a dead end, because one of the multiple people will catch it. And by the way, having multiple authors also helps diffuse the research, which is a very important part of success in academia as well. Certainly, have a research identity, but try to have more than one research stream, because by the time you're up for tenure, you don't want to be seen as somebody who's just a one-trick pony trying to squeeze out the 7th paper out of the same data set. There are exceptions to that if the data set truly is exceptional, for example, but generally it helps to have multiple streams with multiple sets of authors, so that you're not too dependent on one particular author. If something happens in the life of some author, they get busy for personal reasons or professional reasons, your projects are not all stalled. Attending conferences is a fantastic thing to come up with new ideas, diffuse your work, come up with new collaborations, and so on. I think seeking mentorship, people who are willing to mentor you, and this is where going actually also to smaller conferences, where being able to build relationship with senior people who might not be that accessible at bigger conferences can be a great idea. Which goes to the point of network and collaboration that also mentioned earlier. And finally, you have to remember, academia is really a marathon. So you have to maintain a consistent speed throughout, but you can't be running too fast, because then at some point you're going to crash and burn and fall. So that balance is very important. Additional food for thought beyond, the tips I picked out from ChatGPT. Research ultimately is like a portfolio, right? So you have no control, or not as much control over individual papers. Luck plays a huge role. But if you carefully manage the portfolio, the risk at the level of portfolio usually is much smaller than that at the level of individual papers. And that's why, you also build in different kinds of papers. Some might be more home run kind of papers, high risk, high reward, something that you're very passionate about, but there's a risk that it might not get published in a top journal, while a few projects which are a little bit safer, they might look more incremental. Perhaps you're excited, but not as excited about those, but it's worth thinking of a portfolio. Having, as I said, multiple co-author relationships is important, but having some single or first author publications is also important, especially in business schools, where in fields like strategy, where the authorship sequence also matters. Make sure and manage the process of getting credit, because sometimes alphabetical versus non-alphabetical lists and where you appear on that list can be interpreted very differently. So understand the norms in your field and how your list will be viewed. The next point is make sure co-authors are at different career stages, because I think you learn different things from different people, while others might be much more available, but you have less to learn from them. At the same time, it's individual. It's easier to show your contribution when you're working with more junior authors. So a mix is always good. The next point is that you have to show an overall fixed effect across co-authored papers, so that people say it really is you, even if you collaborated with 3 or 4 or 5 other people in different papers, there's a common strength that you, and a common topic, conceptual and maybe empirical tool that you brought across the papers, which people really can ascribe to you so that they don't have to feel that you didn't do enough work on the paper. Quality does not automatically translate into impact. So again, managing the visibility and diffusion is super important. And rather than thinking of teaching and service as painful chores, can you really create synergies between these and your research? A couple of other, quick points. The first is, in academia, most of us got into academia not just for making tenure. Tenure is not an end in itself, but perhaps because we like doing certain things, we want to do certain kind of research, and balancing that against, the pragmatism, as this cartoon shows, is quite important. It needs to be deliberately managed. And by the way, I strongly encourage all doctoral students to look up this website, which is quite funny, but also does have, some valuable insights in my view. You ultimately have to set your own professional agenda and your life agenda, right? You can't base your decisions entirely on what your advisor says or particular people like me or somebody else say, because unless you feel connected with what you're doing in the long term, burnout is very real in this field. It can happen pre-tenure or it can happen post-tenure when people get completely checked out. And hopefully, you're in this game not just for the next 7 years to make tenure, but really for a career for 20, 30, 40 years. And you have to manage that well. Obviously, in the end, everything is a personal choice, including pursuing academia or a tenure track in the first place. We should not think of some choice being inherently better or ideal. You really have to figure out, what works for you in the context of your life. And if you do decide to pursue an academic career, I would say you have to find the sweet spot where you're looking at your own passions and goals, because without that, you won't survive in the long term in this field. But also looking at what conversations can you join where there are gaps in which you can make a unique contribution, which in turn, by the way, will be based on recognizing your own strengths and limitations and playing to the strengths. And for limitations, very often then you can use co-authorships to overcome those. And the last thing I would say is it's worth bearing in mind that, we as academics do ultimately, obviously, like to pursue impact. And it's worth asking the question, how is the world better with, you contributing in the way that you do? And maybe, this is a question that comes from my post-tenure reflection. Obviously, pre-tenure, I was also very focused on just getting the papers done and making tenure. But I realized this is important, and it's useful to start thinking about it earlier, because if you're able to build a career path where you do, on the one hand, have your sight on tenure, but on the other hand, you also know that this is something that will help you feel good about your career, that making a positive impact, whether it's through academic research, but then that research influencing other academics, or maybe influencing practice, or maybe you integrating that with your teaching or how you do service. There certainly are many, many paths. So anyway, good luck in your journey for research, tenure, and beyond that for academia. And I hope I'll run into you soon.